You have an obligation
to be a part of that decision.
You might think it's not important. You might think you're not important.
But that's not true.
And the only way we can prove that to you is by having lots of famous people.
Lots of famous people.
Lots and lots of famous people.
Just a shit ton of famous people.
But you only get this many famous people together if the issue's
One that truly matters to all of us.
a disease or
ecological crisis or
a racist, abusive coward who could permanently damage the fabric of our society.
Do the math.
Do we really want to give nuclear weapons to a man whose signature move is firing?
Firing things?
But we can end this nightmare before it begins.
We can save the day.
for our children.
For our children.
For our children. For our communities.
For our communities.
For our communities.
For America.
For America. For America.
All it takes is all of us.
All of us.
All of us.
We cannot pretend both sides are equally unfavorable.
We can't say one vote doesn't matter.
Your vote matters.
Your vote matters.
It affects everything.
Not just the presidency, but the Senate.
The House.
Your local officials.
Immigration.
Immigrant.
Student debt.
Common sense gun laws.
The Supreme Court.
See, this isn't just an election, it's a tipping point.
For the country.
For the world.
For your world.
Well, they got one thing right, didn't they? The elections certainly are a tipping point for the world. I think the irony is quite obvious in hindsight. Obviously, that's an old PSA put out by a bunch of famous actors trying to implore people to vote for Joe Biden over Donald Trump, because otherwise we would have a madman with nuclear weapons at his disposal. Well, unfortunately, the madman that we went with, the improved madman, today, this morning, appears to have shat himself while commemorating the 80th anniversary of D-Day in France, I believe. And he also authorized, and now has actually happened, they have authorized the Ukrainian military to use American weaponry to strike Russia proper.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold. Where did it come from and where did it go?
Biden writes it off as, we're only authorizing them to do it on, territory that's close to their border. We're not authorizing it against Moscow, so I'm sure Putin's going to be cool with it. Oh, my goodness. But this is the binary, just devil's bargain that we're left with. Donald Trump, who I don't have a ton of faith in, versus Joe Biden, who I have negative infinity faith in. And I don't have anything better to offer you guys, because the Libertarian Party ticket is not going to get it done. It's not even close to. It's obviously, it has no chance of winning regardless, but just in terms of rhetoric, it's a non-starter. So I don't know what to tell you guys. I mean, you could vote Jill Stein. You could vote Cornel West. They're not going to win either. You could vote RFK. Maybe there's a 1% chance that he could beat out the duopoly. But as of now, it looks like the hands down favorite is Donald Trump. And with that comes some reason for optimism and a ton of reason for pessimism. But the counteroffer is 100% pessimism and doom. That's what Biden has delivered in his 3 excruciatingly long years in power. 3.5 now. I just consider for a second that if you've seen Vladimir Zelensky talking anytime recently over the past year in particular, it seems quite apparent to me. I can't prove it. This is just allegedly. This is my opinion. The guy looks like he's yacked out of his mind. He looks like a massive cokehead. He's constantly touching his nose. He's touching his face. He's jittery. And I don't think it has anything to do with the war that he's in, because he ain't on the front lines. He's not shell-shocked. He looks like he's a cokehead. Okay, well, now let's add to the fact that we've sent them hundreds of billions of dollars. Now let's add to the fact that there are reports that are circulating. Again, I can't verify them with absolute certainty, but I do believe them, that he recently purchased a casino for himself with your hard-earned tax dollars. Oh, fun. for upwards of I think it was $180 million, something crazy like that. So yeah, he's living the high life. He's stashing some things away in LLCs that, theoretically we should never know about. But thanks to the sleuths on TikTok, it's a lot harder to hide this information from the public. So we got this, basically a crackhead who's embezzling money for his personal gain while hundreds of thousands of his countrymen die on the front lines unnecessarily. And we've just authorized him to use American munitions and weapon systems against Russia proper, Russian territory itself, which at any other time would have been so obviously the start to World War III. And now, because of this ratchet effect where you just kind of accept the insanity of all this, like, of course, we wouldn't have accepted at the beginning. None of us would have accepted the fact that we were going to send hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine to have a war with Russia. Like, everyone would have said no. But now the ratchet has tightened, and this is where we're at. So now we've ratcheted to, hey, let's give them F-16s, and hey, let's also authorize them to use our weapon systems against Russian territory itself. But it's okay because it's not against Moscow. We'll ratchet to that sometime around, I don't know, August. I mean, it's so dangerous. I can't even do it justice how reckless this is. And it's weird that I'm going to go here, but I'm going to do it. Because Tucker Carlson was on some gentleman named Ryan, I think. I'm sorry, I don't know. I watched like 3/4 of it. Good conversation. And he was talking about how essentially like anything that is self-destructive is ultimately demonic. And as you guys know, I'm very loosely spiritual and not really religious at all. But it did strike me as somewhat profound. I mean, his argument was that there's essentially no other species that kills themselves. Now, I think he's wrong. I think that there are species that do, but it's also part of like their biology, like certain insects will reproduce and then the males will die, things like that. But I think his point was that there's like no other species that actually intentionally takes their own lives because of the emotional state that they're in. And I found that fascinating. I don't know that it's 100% true, but it's certainly largely true. And his argument was essentially that if you get to this point of such despair that you ultimately take your own life, well, then that's evidence of basically negative spiritual energy that has taken over you. And I was like, okay. Again, for me, historically, very woo-woo. But I'm looking at this stuff with, tabula rasa, clean slate here. I'm trying to figure out what's going on in the world. And I'm thinking to myself, like, look, if you're going to risk World War III with the largest, most advanced nuclear power in the world, which is Russia, comparable to America, obviously, and there's really nothing to gain. There's nothing to gain for the American people. There's certainly things to gain for the criminals that run our government, but it doesn't seem to benefit the American people whatsoever. And you're willing to risk all of human existence, then I don't know what to call that other than evil or being possessed by evil. And it's weird for me to say that, but it's like, yeah, it does kind of strike me that these people are... They're waging battles against their own demons, and they're losing. And as a consequence, all of us might. And I hate to start off a show so heavy, but it's like, put in the chat below. Tell me what, like, I can't see any rational explanation for this. The best I can justify in terms of rational explanation would be that, well, these people have all committed such heinous acts of criminality in Ukraine, being kind of this slush fund money laundering operation for decades, that they just all realize that if it comes undone, they go to prison. Okay, that's somewhat rational. If you actually listen to their rhetoric, what do they say? They say that this is all about maintaining the liberal world order, and you have to defend the sovereignty of Ukraine. You can't take land by force and violence. Well, obviously that's not true. We've witnessed many wars where that has occurred. historically and some even recently. So that's not really true either, and I don't believe them, obviously. So I kind of circle back to, well, either it is, okay, we're all so corrupt and we would all go to prison if the truth were to come out, or we are possessed by demons. I can't help but laugh because I'm like, that's what I'm left with. These are the answers that I've come to. And they're not really answers. They're just, essentially thought experiments. But I think it's worth pondering. Like, how do you get to such a point of depravity that you would actually risk this? Like, Joe Biden, he has to still look his granddaughters or kids in the face. And like, do you understand the risk that you're putting them in? I mean, I'm not saying it's a high percentage chance that nuclear weapons get exchanged in the not too distant future, but it's way higher than it has ever been in my life by a lot. And you're responsible for that, Joe. Like, I know you're not the guy making these decisions, but you're the guy that could get in front of a microphone and say, we're not doing this. And you don't do that. And then you go and you hang out with your granddaughters and you look them in the face and it's like, do you feel nothing? And I guess, Biden's a bad example because he probably doesn't feel anything because his brain doesn't function. But like Anthony Blinken, Victoria Nuland, any of these people that are actually like decision makers in the State Department, do any of you guys actually look at your children? Do you have children? Do you value anything above yourself and power and money and control? Because if you don't, then you're like, your existence is so empty. I don't know. Just a interesting thought experiment that I had. By the way, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to run the Dave Smith, Vivek, and myself kind of roundtable that we did. It was called a debate. Didn't end up being much of a debate, but it was a great conversation. And I know many of you have seen it, but I think probably most of you have not seen or heard it. So I'm going to add that. I'm going to append that to the end of this episode. I'm headed to San Diego for 3 days to visit my family and see my niece for the second time. She's like 14 months now, and I'm super happy. First time I met her, I cried like a baby. So I'm hoping that I can not cry the second time, but it's been like 6 months since I've seen her. So I might. We'll find out soon. And then I will be back on Monday and get back after it. So just wanted to give you guys an update.
It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here.
As you guys have probably heard, the former president of the United States is now a 30-plus time convicted felon. Welcome to America, motherfuckers. Oh, my goodness. Look, I know this is like almost a week-old news at this point, but I just got a couple minutes of thoughts on it. I mean, first off, if you guys haven't been following the show regularly, I've talked about these cases to a decent extent, and I think that they're all extraordinarily trumped up, pun intended and not. I just think that they are grasping at straws. There's this bizarre level of desperation to keep Trump out of power for a second time. I mean, there was obviously a bizarre level of desperation to undermine him the first time. And the reason I say it's bizarre is because in terms of how he governed, there wasn't much that he did that was out of alignment with Barack Obama or George Bush. There was some meaningful differences, and I appreciated those, but like, was it such an earth-shattering, threat to the deep state that they have to do this to this guy? Like, no. Like, it was very minor. Like, very, very minor. So, wow. And I think that, my assessment of that has been that, that just their hold on power is very tenuous. That these people really perceive just having a mouthpiece, which is part of the reason I'm optimistic, is that they perceive having a mouthpiece that even highlights their depravity might be enough to galvanize kind of a populist movement in this country that could ultimately undermine their well-laid plans. Now, maybe I'm reading too much into it. There's a lot of people that go the opposite route, and they say, oh, no, Donald Trump's just part of the system. and he's playing the heel. I really struggle with that thesis just simply because he's genuinely facing years in prison, and I don't think that a guy signs up to be the heel and then does that. So my honest assessment is that if he is not on our side, which I think is, fair to say he's probably not, well, then he's probably the leader of some other power faction in DC, in the business world, or at least he has become that. And I think that's a fair thesis. But again, it's like, well, Joe Biden does basically everything the corporations want. Joe Biden does basically everything the military-industrial complex wants. So I don't understand the difference between the factions per se. It's very hard to see the differences. Like that's the honest to God's truth. Like it's very challenging to see the differences in terms of actually like policy proposals. Donald Trump talks about building the wall. Joe Biden talks about not. He talks about basically opening the border. And then last week he puts out, a presidential or executive order or whatever it was to really finally crack down on illegal immigration, which once again just demonstrates that Joe Biden could have done that at any time, which means that he was lying through his teeth for over 3.5 years. And this is just about November. Like that's the only reason he's doing it. But just point being, like, if you set aside the rhetoric of the two sides and you just look at the actions, it's like, okay, Trump talks about avoiding World War III, which I'm going to run that clip for you in a second, but he's also bragged about providing weaponry to Ukraine. When Barack Obama would only send them blankets and pillows, the big badass, sent them, weaponry. I mean, certainly Biden has been worse in terms of escalating things with Russia. But again, like you would imagine, like once they invade Ukraine, it's going to be significantly worse in terms of American aid to Ukraine. So it's just so tough. I know you guys come to shows like this looking for answers, and I wish I could provide them. But on this case in particular, it's just very challenging to understand how this all works, like behind the scenes. And it gets even harder. I'll just give you some insight from my vantage point. It gets even harder once you start to know some of these people a little bit. I don't know Vivek Ramaswamy well, but I do know him. Like we've talked for hours and hours, and he comes off as a really nice, sincere guy. Like he really does. But at the same time, I can't trust him because he's a politician. And I've spent 30 plus years watching politics and watching these scumbags lie to us. And it's like, how could I possibly trust you? But the point in bringing that up is that, like, in terms of personability and personality and likability and, just being an engaging, nice dude, like, it couldn't ask for more. He's just so nice. He's such a good guy. But it makes it even harder then because you're like, okay, I'm sure there are other people of that caliber, not many, but some, that get into politics and they become total fucking pieces of shit. In which case you have to like think to yourself, okay, is there any changing this system through electoral processes? And I think that the obvious, likely conclusion is that it's not, that there's really not, that you can vote on the margins for slightly different rhetoric, but in terms of 90% of what's going to happen has nothing to do with anything that we vote on. And I know that sounds really black-pilled, and it kind of is, if I'm being honest. But that's my honest assessment. Is like, yeah, that's probably right. I think 90% of everything that the United States government has done and will do over the next 4 years is going to be regardless of who you vote for in November, or rather, who wins in November. And that's an amazing thing to think about. And just circling back to Vivek, this is why I've been such a big supporter of the guy, because his rhetoric, at least, is all about going after the deep state and 50% or 75% headcount cuts across all federal departments. And it's like, okay, well, look, will he do it? I don't know. Does he want to do it? I think, but I'm not sure. Could he do it? Probably not. But that's what we need so badly, Because if you do that, well, then maybe the next election, when you cast that vote, it actually means 50% difference in terms of what will actually happen. Because the president all of a sudden might actually be able to do some of those things, as opposed to being spied on by the FBI and attempted to be couped and then prosecuted in multiple states for a bunch of BS charges, and then face 100 years in prison, and then have your palace in South Florida raided, and have, shoot to kill orders. That's like all this craziness. Like maybe those types of things go away. Or on the inverse, maybe it gets way, way worse. Maybe if you do that, then they really take the gloves off, and it becomes, as opposed to persuasion or propaganda, it was a better way to put it, it becomes overt violence. Instead of just having the news lie to us, they start to round people up. And I know that sounds blackpilling, and it kind of is. If I'm being honest, it kind of is. But I'm just being honest. Like, that's what I see. And that's what I think might be on offer. Like if say for a second that Donald Trump is in fact an outsider, like a true outsider. Well, first off, he's not really behaving like that, but set that aside. Say he is. And he were to get in there and make Vivek his VP, and they go 75%, firing across the board. Well, that's enough. That would be enough to save this country. I know that sounds crazy, but I genuinely believe it. If you were to do that, you would actually be able to then cut down on the spending and budget and borrowing and everything else. But like, do you think that they're going to let them do that? And I think the answer is no. No. They won't even let you audit the Fed. You think they're going to let you fire 75% of their lackeys? No. So, buy Bitcoin. I don't know what else to tell you, man. Learn how to farm. buy cattle, buy chickens, get Bitcoin. Sorry, I didn't mean to take this so dark. I really didn't. But I just wanted to explain my thought process and my analysis on all these things, because I tweeted out this morning that if Donald Trump is sincere about trying to garner the libertarian vote, then he really ought to have Vivek on his short list. And all of the short lists I've seen over the past month have left Vivek out entirely. It's been Tim Scott and JD Vance and a whole bunch of people that I'm not super fond of. And, the replies I get from people are always the same. It's like no one ever actually reads through everybody else's reply, but you guys all say the same thing. And they're just like, I don't trust him. I don't trust him. It's like, all right, tell me who then. Because I trust Thomas Massie, but do you want to lose Thomas Massie from the House? Probably not. Would it be great to have him be second in line from a 78-year-old to becoming the president of the United States? Yeah, sure. I would risk his House seat for that. But it's not going to happen. I mean, Trump has tried to kick Thomas Massie out repeatedly from the House. So that ain't going to happen. Rand Paul's in the Senate. That's a really powerful position to be in. We probably don't want to lose that guy. So it's like, okay, JD Vance, not good on economics. Not really good on China, as best I've seen. So, I mean, but then again, Vivek's not great on China. So, I don't know. I guess my point in all this is there's no really fucking great options here, folks. That's just the truth. There's just really no good options. And I tried desperately to give you one. Would we have won? Absolutely not. But I wanted to give you an option. Because I wanted an option. Because I'm so sick of casting votes for, these tickets that I either I hate or don't have a chance, and I don't really like anyways. It's like, well, if I'm going to throw my vote away on principle, I would like it to be for someone I really believe in. And I'm like, who do I believe in? Me. I'm just kidding. I don't really believe in me. Just anybody that has my ideas, our ideas. It's like, I just want that one time. Please let me have it one time. Nope. We got to have, trans and the kids. Best we can do. You want Ron Paul and end the Fed? You get trans the kids. That's the best I can do. Best offer. So why, oh why, would I have any optimism at all in a second Trump term? Well, let's hear from James Comey.
Are you concerned that it may get a test unlike any other if Donald Trump is reelected? I mean, when you think about a second Trump administration, what do you think the implications would be for the FBI?
Oh, serious, for the Justice Department and the FBI, because Trump is coming for those institutions. He knows their power, and I think he has regrets that he didn't work hard enough to corrupt them last time. So he's coming for them, and that's a danger for all Americans. He's going to put people in positions in those organizations. He didn't have all-stars the last time. He'll have the bottom of the barrel this time, but people who will want to do his will, and that should worry every American. This election matters because of a reason like that. People have to participate. You cannot sit on the sideline. I don't care how you feel about Joe Biden, you must vote for him because the consequences on the other side are too severe.
Wow. Does he sound scared to you or what? I mean, that was the head of the FBI. That was the guy. So, yeah, that gives me a little hope. It doesn't just stop there, though. This is the crazy thing. So now we got another top FBI guy, and Andrew McCabe, saying essentially the same thing. It's like, it's mind-blowing.
It's great to have you here because just few people know the inner workings of the FBI better than you do. And you've also personally experienced the pressure from Donald Trump. And when you see him promising this wholesale takeover of the Justice Department, I wonder how you worry about what that would look like.
Yeah, Caitlin, I mean, I worry a lot about it. And I think it's, you know, when you think about these things and you try to predict how Donald Trump is going to react or the steps he's going to take, you really don't have to go any further than listening to the things he says and does. I mean, his comments recently are offensive and horrendous, but they're not surprising in any way. He's been saying this for quite some time. I will be your retribution is his refrain to his supporters. So, you know him, you know what motivates him. He is not a person who's driven by principle or ideology. He is someone who's entirely transactional. And if he feels like he's been wronged in some way, then he focuses on revenge and vengeance. And so he's made it perfectly clear that that's what he's going to do. And in the process of seeking that, he is going to he runs the risk of really dismantling and greatly incapacitating the Department of Justice and the FBI. And
wow, Andrew, why would he be interested? Why would he feel as if he's been wronged? Andrew McCabe, former deputy director of the FBI. Why would he feel that way? Could it be that you spied on his campaign before he was even the president, and then used that information through all sorts of nefarious means to ultimately put a bunch of his people in prison? Could it be that? Or the fact that he was impeached over bullshit that ultimately Joe Biden was guilty of? Could he have any just cause to think that you guys were working to ultimately undermine him and then keep him out of power and then throw him in prison for the rest of his life? Should he have any reason to doubt that you are just an upstanding member of the FBI looking out for the American people? Yeah, I think he might have a reason, Andy. I think he might have a reason to doubt your sincerity. By the way, how fucking gross is it that they have these scumbags that basically become talking heads for MSNBC and CNN? Like, such a dark vortex of evil.
that is something that Americans on both sides of the political aisle should be worried about.
Yeah.
We depend on those institutions to protect us.
Well, what do you think it's,
and he is
what do
proposing to
people
tear them
inside,
down.
what do people inside the FBI think when they hear a comment like that?
You know, it's terrifying. It's frightening. I have a lot of conversations with former colleagues, people who are or were in the intelligence and law enforcement community and may have worked in, the Obama administration, other places. And, people are really trying to assess, like, what is life going to be like if Donald Trump wins a second term? And on a very personal level, I mean, these are torturous discussions with their family members about whether or not they have to leave the country to avoid being unconstitutionally and illegally detained. I mean, people are actually worried about being thrown in jail or grabbed in some sort of extrajudicial detention. And
you gotta love the irony of this. These people are afraid of being thrown in jail, which is why we've done everything in our power to throw Donald Trump in jail for the past 5 years straight. Oh my goodness. No, actually 8 years straight. These guys have been doing it for 8 years straight. Wow. So now they sit around going, well, he might try and do that to us. We did it to him. So if he gets back in power, he's going to do it to us. Yeah, dude, that's how it works. This is Game of Thrones shit. You come for the king, you know? Oh, these people, man. There's a couple more seconds.
And I think, as crazy as this sounds in the United States of America, I think people should really consider that these are possibilities. Listen to what the man says. He typically does what he says, as crazy as it seems. And that's really all the indicators you need.
Man, if Donald Trump actually did what he says all the time, I would be a much more, I would be a supporter at that point. But he doesn't really do that. Does he? Does he really? Because I think he talked about balancing the budget. Oops! Spent more money than, almost more than Barack Obama in his 2 terms, which were the highest spending in American history. Almost did more than that in 1 term. He talked about ending the wars. Kinda did, kinda didn't. Came out just yesterday saying he actually didn't plan to shut down Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. They were going to leave that. So that wasn't really going to end the war, was it? I mean, you think the Taliban was going to let you keep that base, brother? And how do you end the occupation while still maintaining the base? You probably can't. So I don't know. But I just think it's fascinating that these people are so, like, they seem genuinely concerned. And I got to be honest, that makes me feel good. That's what I want to see. I want to see the people that have ultimately been committing treason, because that's allegedly, that's what I think they've done. I'd like to see them actually held to account for what they've done, or at least investigated sincerely. Please, could we have any actual light shed on the corruption in this country? It's just amazing that you got 2, really high up FBI guys that are both saying the exact same thing. And okay, yeah, you can go real Alex Jones on it and say, "Oh, it's an op. They're just trying to trick you because they want you to vote for Trump." Okay, yeah, maybe. I have no idea, dude. I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I don't think that you actually threaten this guy with hundreds of years in prison and throw a bunch of his people in prison from his cabinet, like 10 or something crazy, and it's all just an op. Like, no, I don't think so. I really don't. So, only conclusion is these people are actually afraid of this dude. And that's probably as good a reason to support him as anything. Tell me I'm wrong. Put it in the comments. Tell me why I'm wrong. Who else do they fear? Do they talk smack about RFK? I don't hear him talking about RFK. Maybe if he was polling at 35%, they'd be doing the same stuff. But for the most part, they don't say shit about the guy. They certainly don't say anything negative about Biden. They're telling you, you have to vote for him. Otherwise, God forbid, the deep state might fall. And they certainly don't give a fuck about the LP ticket. So I don't know. That's my analysis on that one. And here's probably the biggest upside to Trump. And, honestly, he's not good when it comes to Israel-Palestine at all. In fact, he said Israel has to finish and finish strong. Don't like any of that. But let's be honest, in terms of like existential threat from conflicts, like, yeah, we would be devastated in a war against Iran, but like this is world ending if we have a hot war against Russia. So I like what he has to say here. I really do.
I love this country. I don't want to see this country get into a nuclear war and be so badly damaged. What we say won't matter. This won't matter. This place won't matter. Nothing will matter because practically nothing's going to be here anymore. The level of power, of power with the weapons and the weaponry, that's real weaponry. That's worse than the weaponry that we were talking about a little while ago. This is the ultimate, this is obliteration, maybe world obliteration. And we have a man that is not capable of even discussing it. He talked the other night about that nuclear doesn't matter so much. What matters is, think of this, global warming. The only global warming that matters to me is nuclear global warming, because that's the real deal. He said it's an existential threat. He loves the words existential threat. That global warming is an existential threat. And he doesn't know why. What is it? It's weather. And I'm all for that. You know what? I'm in a certain way, in a very powerful way, I'm an environmentalist. I want clean air, I want clean water. But this is not the existential threat. Tomorrow, we could have a war that will be so devastating that you can never recover from it. Nobody can. The whole world won't be able to recover from it. And he's talking about something in 400 years from now. The oceans will rise by 1/8 of an inch. Look.
Look, there's something to the simplicity with which Donald Trump conveys things. And if I'm being honest, like, that's what Americans need to hear. Like, they don't want to hear from me or Scott Horton or Dave. They want to have it broken down real simple like that. They don't want to know about Maidan. They don't want to know about 2014. They don't want to know about the backstory. They don't have time for it. They just want to know, how does this affect me? Does this benefit me, and how will it affect me? And that's what he does. He conveys that very simply. But the thing that's valuable about it is that he's conveying a truth that no one else at the highest level of politics is really conveying to them. And it's important that they hear it. It's really important that they understand that there is a real risk here. Again, not a high risk, but a very fucking real risk that has absolutely astronomical consequences if it goes as bad as it could. And it's like, I like the fact that he talks about that periodically. It's bizarre that he can't extrapolate that and go like, hey, maybe our support for Israel is a little bit over the top and maybe I shouldn't be going that route. But it's like, all right, well, if he's just the figurehead for some other power faction, well, it certainly looks like there's some fingerprints when it comes to, just look at his funding, okay? Just look at where his biggest campaign contributions come from. It's no mystery. It happened in 2016, happened in 2020, and it's happening again this go around. And that is formerly Sheldon Adelson and now his widow, his wife. $100 million she just sent him. So that's where his allegiance is going to lie. And let's be honest, it's not as if the Democrats aren't in basically perfect lockstep with with Israel too. So there's your poo-poo platter of choices. But it's like Joe Biden is rapidly escalating with Russia. You can't get around that fact. For me, my highest priority is to avoid that. As he said in that clip, literally nothing else matters. What we're doing here, the studio, none of it matters. If that happens, nothing matters. So what does that mean? Well, that means it has to be our highest priority to avoid that. So that's how I assess these things. That's how I come to these conclusions. And now we have Donald Trump's former scumbag lawyer, Michael Cohen, who just testified against him, now getting to give it more commentary on MSNBC, once again demonstrating that all of these news media outlets are just basically funnels for the scum of the earth.
Is going to sentence him to prison or to jail? The answer is no.
Right, but you think you've also said that you don't think he should be sentenced to jail, and
I'm afraid of him going to jail.
Why?
And not for him, not for his safety. That's on him. He's got Secret Service protection. I'm more concerned for you and for all of us and our families and for the American people, because this clown had 4 years of being debriefed on national security issues. On top of that, if he becomes the Republican nominee, he gets debriefed again starting now. Think about this. America, think about this for a second. You have now a Republican leading candidate who is a felon who's going to be debriefed on national security issues, knowing how loose-lipped he is, how he's willing to give away America's secrets to Vladimir Putin or to anybody for money or just simply for bragging rights. He did it with the Australian billionaire at Mar-a-Lago. He sat there in Helsinki with Vladimir Putin talking about national security issues, but nobody else was around except for Vladimir Putin's translator. I mean, these are not normal things. You don't allow somebody like Donald Trump to be declassified, especially now as a felon. So my concern is, in a prison situation, he's willing to give away these secrets, as I always say, for a bag of tuna or a book of stamps.
Michael Cohen is such a scumbag. It's unbelievable. Like, such a weird analysis, by the way. Like, if he's in prison, he's going to get read in again. Like, do you think that he's actually, like, he's going to win the presidency and remain in prison, Michael Cohen? Is that your, you think he's going to serve his second term from San Quentin? Like, what are we talking about? That's almost certainly not going to be what happens. So, look, Michael Cohen's a pathological liar. He admitted to stealing $30,000 from Trump on the stand just a few weeks ago. Total pathological liar. I think he's been debarred. I don't know. Anyways, point being, it's just weird how panicked all these people are about Trump. And it seems genuine. And now, I don't trust Michael Cohen. And obviously, I don't trust the FBI guys either. But the fact that they would even message this way is strange. It's strange that they fear him so deeply. And it gives me a little bit of hope. It does. I'm just being honest with you. It gives me a little bit of hope that, like, maybe his retribution talk is for real. Maybe. Tim certainly believes it is. Tim Pool. I struggle so hard to possibly believe that he's going to actually go in there and gut things. Like, I just don't see it happening. But the fact that these people are talking like that is like, all right, well, that's the only reason I've got for optimism. I'm just, that's it. That's all I got. I'm grasping at straws here, folks. Here's a flashback to the debate for the 2020 presidential candidacy for Biden and Trump.
Talking about race right now, and I do want to stay on the issue of race. President Trump,
I have to respond to that.
Please,
because look,
very quickly.
There are 50 former national intelligence folks who said that what he's accusing me of is a Russian plant. They have said that this has all the 5 former heads of the CIA, both parties, say what he's saying is a bunch of garbage. Nobody believes it except his and his good friend Rudy Giuliani.
You mean the laptop is now another Russia hoax?
That's exactly what.
Is this
that's
where you're
exactly
going?
what.
This is where he's going. The laptop is Russia,
Gentlemen,
Russia.
I want to stay on the issue of race.
You
okay?
have to be kidding. Here we go again with Russia.
We're going to continue on the issue of.
Gotta love Trump's reaction. That was sincere. And you know how I know it was sincere? Because he was telling the truth. Because it had nothing to do with Russia. And the reason we know that is over the past 24 hours, the FBI actually acknowledged, because they're prosecuting Hunter Biden, they had to acknowledge that everything on that laptop was true. How you like that? How you like them apples? And guess what? Exactly what I've been reporting to you guys for over a year, many years now, that in fact the FBI knew and had in their possession Hunter's laptop in 2019. Of course they fucking knew it was real. Of course they knew. And the 51 current and former intelligence community agents that came out and wrote that letter saying it has all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation, yeah, they lied through their fucking teeth. Oh, what a shocker, huh? I know we're all shocked. Anyways, little victory lap for everybody that's fucking not stupid, that's been listening to me for years. It's like, oh yeah, we already knew that. And this is like, I guess the point I wanted to make is like, yes, hey, cool, we got it right. We were right. Okay. But like, it's so fucking frustrating, guys. It's so frustrating to like know so much of the truth when it came to the lockdowns and the COVID and the fucking, and the Russia Gate and the Russia, Ukraine and Israel, Palestine. Like, we know all the truth years in advance and it does us no good. like it doesn't change anything. It's nice to know, I guess, but it almost makes me envious of the people that like are hearing the news today and they're like, wow, those 51 intelligence community agents, they got that one wrong. Like, you sweet, naive piece of shit. Like, God bless. For me, it's just like endless frustration because I'm sitting there for years just like, tactfully poking holes in these bullshit narratives and going, hey, here's what's actually happening. And here's how I know it. And here's why. Of course they had the laptop. Of course they did. Of course they did. They had it before. So why would they why would they possibly say that it's disinformation from Russia? We all know this, but like there's a huge percentage of the country that hears it today and goes, "Oh, wow. I got real duped." I'm sure they'll tell me the truth next time though. Fuck. Sorry, I didn't mean to hit the mic. It's just so frustrating. It's so incredibly frustrating that this isn't just obvious to everyone, Oh, God. speaking of things that are obvious to everyone, we had some, I don't think it was actually leaked audio. I think it was from a podcast, but there was a big hearing with Fauci late last week. And, I still can't talk about most of this on the show, but I'll run one brief clip.
Once people feel empowered and protected legally, you are going to have schools, universities, and colleges are going to say, you want to come to this college, buddy? You're going to get vaccinated. Lady, you're going to get vaccinated. Yeah. Big corporations like Amazon and Facebook and all of those others are going to say, you want to work for us, you get vaccinated. And it's been proven that when you make it difficult for people in their lives, they lose their ideological bullshit and they get vaccinated.
That's exactly what you meant when you said making it hard for people to live without getting a vaccination. You affected people's ability to work, travel, be educated, to actually flourish in American society, to self-determine, as we're all given God-given rights. Shame on you. You inspired and created fear through mass mandates, school closures, vaccine mandates that have destroyed the American people's trust in our public health institution.
That was Rich McCormick. He's a Republican congressman. I forget what state. I think it might be Georgia. But what made that really good was that he was actually a MD, and he actually cared for COVID patients during that era. And he had this 5-minute just rip into Fauci that was glorious. I don't think I can safely play all of it, which is absurd because it's literal testimony from our House of Representatives. But you can look it up for yourself if you want to see the full thing. That was the best part, in my opinion. And I just think that there's been a tremendous gaslighting attempt to try and rewrite this history. I think it was Ed Krasenstein that tweeted out yesterday that no government official or anybody involved in the manufacturing of the vaccines ever said that they were 100% safe and effective. I immediately remembered where I had seen it, and I went to look it up. And in fact, it was Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, who said 100% effective. He didn't say safe, but he did say 100% effective based off trials in South Africa. And I, quote tweeted Mr. Krasenstein with it and ratioed him into oblivion because his had 500 likes and mine had 20,000. So one of the worst ratios I've ever seen. But again, does it change anything? And I think that's the real issue that we're having is that, like, you and I know the truth about that era, and we're not going to be gaslit into misremembering it or forgetting it. Like, we will never forget it. We know exactly what you did. We know exactly that Anthony Fauci, well, he said, I was just giving advice here and there. Well, when you hear him on that audio clip, what he's saying is, I was giving advice to break the American people's will of opposition against my dictates. That's what he was saying. I mean, he didn't say it explicitly, but we're all adults here. We know what he was fucking saying. And to a large extent, it worked. It broke tens of millions of Americans that did not want to go along with it, that did anyways. And kudos to you, to the handful, I know many of you listen to me, are the ones that did not. You did not break. But here's the issue. Does he face justice? No. You had Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I very much appreciated her rant, saying, Mr. Fauci or Dr. Fauci, you belong in prison. And she goes, we ought to be drafting, instructions for investigations and prosecutions. It's like, hey, MTG, thank you for the rhetoric. Also, why the fuck aren't you the one drafting that? Why aren't any of you doing that? Why aren't you investigating? Like, for the billionth time, it's not about Fauci for me. It's about what he symbolizes. And no, contrary to what he claims he symbolizes, it ain't the science that I'm upset with. I'm upset with totalitarians. I'm upset with the complete abdication and violation of the Bill of Rights. I need that to be resolved. And let's be honest, Donald Trump ain't going to look into that. He was way too much of a cheerleader for it to ever actually look deeply into it. RFK is probably our best hope when it comes to that particular issue. But then on top of that, you have fucking his climate change zealotry. So it's like, I don't have a good answer on that front. But this is a real problem with the corruption in the system that no one is held to account. Like, even when someone is held to account, Donald Trump, he did a bunch of shit that I didn't like during his presidency, a bunch of which was undoubtedly criminal. But what's he getting prosecuted for? Bunch of bullshit that's not criminal and shouldn't be prosecuted, in my opinion. So if you get any justice at all, it will come under the pretense of shit that they're not really guilty of, while they overlook all the shit that they are guilty of. And that's just not how you actually fix this system. That's not actually how you prevent these totalitarian instincts from rising once again in the not too distant future. And that's my deepest fear, is that even though the American people to a large extent have realized the deception that occurred in 2020, if no one in power is actually held to account for the criminality in all of it, well, then why would they not do it again? Sure, it'll be under a different pretense. It'll be climate change. It'll be whatever. It's probably not going to be bird flu. But if no one's held to account, of course they're going to do it again. And is anybody going to be held to account? Almost certainly not. So what conclusion does that lead you to? Well, then they're almost certainly going to do it again. And there's nothing we can do to stop it. And that sucks. God, this episode's really black-pilled. I'm sorry. I'm just walking you through my logic here. And it's like, well, okay, look, yeah, they're going to try it again. I guess that's a better way of putting it. And our hope is that because we have larger media outlets that are outside of the mainstream that reach such enormous audiences now, and the recent history of going along with totalitarian dictates was so catastrophically misguided and filled with deceit, that hopefully the opposition would be so significant that they won't try it again. And I think that is ultimately the white pill in the midst of all of these black pills that I fed you today. Apologies. Well, let me give you a reason to have, to be more cheerful. We've got the I believe she's the president of the European Commission, I think, Ursula von der Leyen. This is what she had to say recently.
And finally, it takes resilience. As technology evolves, we need to build up societal immunity around information manipulation. Because research has shown that pre-bunking is much more successful than debunking. Pre-bunking is basically the opposite of debunking. In short, prevention is preferable to cure. Perhaps if you think of information manipulation as a virus, instead of treating an infection once it has taken hold, that is debunking. It is much better to vaccinate so that the body is inoculated. Pre-bunking is the same approach.
It's all so fucking Orwellian. It's enough to tear your hair out if you have any. What is she saying there? I mean, let's just break it down real quick. So basically, pre-bunking means that you're going to propagandize. That's really what you're saying. You're going to counter disinformation before it happens. I don't know how you even know how you can do that before it happens, because you have to respond in some way. So that means that you just have to propagandize. You have to put out your own narrative and ultimately then do what? Well, we have to fight misinformation, disinformation, right? So we have to censor. So we're going to censor the disinformation and we're going to propagandize you into the correct worldview. But it's all Orwellian newspeak, so you can't really tell unless your ears are attuned to this. But she is one of the most powerful, probably the most powerful woman in Europe, right there with Angela Merkel. And yeah, real totalitarian instincts. And all of it has been, just Orwellian its way into something that doesn't sound so obviously grotesque. And unfortunately, there are billions of people on Earth that aren't attuned to what you and I are, and they hear that and they go, yeah, well, of course, you gotta pre-bunk. You gotta pre-bunk the disinformation. I mean, what does it entail? Well, it entails censorship and spying and all sorts of shit. And also actively propagandizing everyone in your nation and all over the world. Very cool, Ursula. Thank you. So glad that you're, in charge of Europe. These people, man. These people. But, again, reason for optimism. At least there are outlets that allow you to hear the truth and break through these bullshit narratives. I pre-bunk you, if you will, Ursula. That's what I just did. I pre-bunked your disinformation by explaining exactly what your Orwellian newspeak actually means in reality. Fuck you very much. All right, let's do it. We're going to get into the debate, aka roundtable, between myself, Dave Smith, and Vivek Ramaswamy, which happened last Friday. And I thought it went really well. I already told you guys about the breakdown. For those of you that have already seen it, well, thank you for watching wherever you saw it. I'd love to hear your comments down below as to what you thought about it. And for those that haven't seen it yet, here's your opportunity to do so. Enjoy. Oh, by the way, before I get out of here, I just want to say thank you guys so much for supporting my work. A ton of you have signed up for my locals, libertylockdown.locals.com. I think it has a lot to do with the fundraising that we're doing for the Rife Machine. So libertylockdown.locals.com if you want to get in on that. And if you want to support my work another way is at LibertyLockPod on X. You can subscribe. And last but not least, I would... Oh, by the way, if you subscribe on my X, I'll follow you back. And then last but not least... What was I going to say? Oh, greatest... if you have no money at all and you just want to support the show, best way to do so, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps juice the algorithm so that I show up as, when people search for Dave Smith or Tom Woods or Malice or whatever, I come up in that algo, and it's helped a lot because it's grown the show tremendously over the years. So continue to leave those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts. I appreciate you guys. I will see you in a few days. Enjoy the roundtable between myself, Dave Smith, and Vivek Ramaswamy.
Full disclosure, as I kind of moderate this thing, I love both of these guys. They're my guys. I think it is so cool that Vivek Ramaswamy came to this convention to talk to us. This is something the Libertarian Party has never really had before, where national figures are coming to address our concerns. And of course, I'm very happy that my boy Clint Russell won the VP nod to be up here.
Thank you, guys.
All right. So broadly speaking, I think the topic for this was how to dismantle the deep state or something like that. Yeah. One of my favorite things about you, Vivek, I shouldn't say one of my favorite things. My favorite thing about you and what your campaign and your voice has kind of been directing is this kind of, I think one of the things missing from the populist Trumpist movement in this country is a direct focus on a reduction in the size and power and secrecy of government. And it's one thing to kind of say in the abstract, we're going to drain the swamp. Yeah. But if spending is going up and the spy agencies always have their secrecy, the swamp by definition is not drained. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so look, this is part of the fork in the road of the Republican Party I was talking about. A lot of well-intentioned Republicans believe that you have to reform this administrative state. Fire Christopher Wray, you will hear. And then wait for an applause line afterwards, right? It doesn't work because if you cut off one head of an 8-headed hydra, it grows right back. You have to gut it at its core. And so I am of the belief the only correct answer is actually to shut it down and start from scratch and don't rebuild the same cancer you created in the first place. This is practical. So they say the president can't do this. Actually, the beautiful thing about the law is one of the things politicians ought to try is actually try reading it. Turns out the president, there are these civil service protection rules which I'm against, which say I can't fire you because I disagree with you of your views on abortion or whatever. Fine. Say what you will. Those rules do not apply to mass layoffs. And mass layoffs are absolutely what we need to bring to the D.C. bureaucracy. And what Elon Musk did to Twitter, we need to bring on steroids to D.C. And you know what? Anytime, and here's the other step of this that we don't talk about enough, anytime one of those government officials has pressured a private sector actor to do something that the government official couldn't do directly, we got to disclose that. You call it the Twitter files in the case of one company. I call it the state action files. Anytime a government actor has done something through the back door that they couldn't through the front door, at least we as the public have to actually see it. And I think that combination of transparency and actually be willing to shut down and mass fire large numbers of people is what it's going to take, because no other amount of reform can actually get that job done.
No disagreement, actually. I would just add that what I find confusing is that it was James Comey and Crossfire Hurricane that was responsible for ultimately spying on and attempting to coup Donald Trump. And there's this rhetoric about, well, we need to shut it down and we need to start from new, but it implies that the institution itself isn't the fatally flawed institution. Like, do we need a federal police force, which is essentially what the FBI is? Do we need, thank you, do we need a central intelligence agency which goes around toppling dictators and fomenting coups? And no, the answer should be no.
They topple democratically elected governments too.
Yes. In fairness. So I think that is probably the biggest divide between, from our conversations in the past, is like, it seems to me that America got off the path that it was supposed to be on sometime around the foundation of the central bank and the FBI and the
Woodrow Wilson.
Yes. Yeah, the progressive era. So why can't we rewind? Why do we have to not just fire and cut and shut down and rebuild, but rather just shut down, abolish, and be done with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's start with step one, right? Because we've got the long run future, and then we've got the next 12 months. And I think that the moment we live in right now, we cannot let this one slip our hands right now. Is within 8 months, within 9 months, I believe we will be in a position to turn a lot of this into reality. And you got to take one of two risks, right? Because you can't say, I'm going to cut exactly the amount that I need to. None of us is God, okay? The way you got to look at it is there's one of two risks you're going to take. One risk is you're not going to cut enough. You cut fat, but you don't cut enough fat, but at least you're not cutting muscle. The other risk is you're going to say, you know what, I'm taking a risk, but I'm cutting so much that I'm going to risk actually cutting some muscle. That's the risk I think we got to be willing to take. That's the risk we got to take. So that's the next step. And then if we discover that we cut some muscle, right, and something happens that we didn't know about, and we're like, oh, no, that was really necessary. I'm open to taking the risk to say we learned that the hard way, and then we will rebuild what we're missing. So that's the way I look at it. Okay. Maybe we'll need that step, and maybe we won't. And I suspect in 99% of the cases we'll discover that we didn't. Yep. But step one is step one. Yep. And step one is actually making the afuera.
Afuera.
Well done. So I think that's the way we got it. We got to bring a little Javier to the United States of America.
Completely agree.
On steroids.
Mucho Millet.
I love meeting that guy earlier this year too. He's an animal. So I think he'd be a good advisor to the next administration, I think.
Right. You, of course, when you met him, I think I remember you said that he's a big Mises guy and you're more of a Hayek guy.
Yeah. He actually was a big Rothbard guy, actually. He was a big Rothbard guy. Now. When he told me, because I said that beforehand, and then when he saw me, he's like, actually Rothbard. So I said.
Okay. I can only get so erect. Now, this is a little bit off topic, but since this Malay thing came up, you said you're more of a Hayek guy. Have you not read Mises? And if you have read Mises, how could you possibly prefer Hayek?
Well, it's a first love kind of thing. It's a first love kind of thing, right? Because Mises is, in the modern sense of the word, what you'd call more based, okay? But Hayek was actually the constitutional liberty was my first love.
Fair enough.
And so what brought you in, right? Everybody here has something that drew them in the first time. And so for me, it was at the age of 19 reading the Constitutional Liberty.
Fair enough.
And his case for not just the economic, because I'd read Nozick before, and I was underwhelmed, right? I don't know about how all of you feel, but Nozick is brilliant, right? I mean, IQ off the charts. But he made a case that didn't tap into the moral case for actually being a libertarian. And I think Hayek did that in a beautiful way. He made the moral case for capitalism, that not only was it the right system, it was the only just system. And I think the constitutional liberty, the part that stood out to me the most, actually, and bringing me back to my own, late teen years here, is he said, you don't actually respect your fellow human if you condescend upon them so much to say that their own worth is tied to their financial worth. Right? So if the whole premise for the redistributionist project was that your own financial worth is tied to your moral worth, that means you are morally so worthy that you deserve some iota of distribution. That means it causes you to still adopt that same premise and say, well, therefore, because you have less, you're still worth less, which is actually how we operate in an otherwise crony capitalist corrupt system where you're able to buy the favors you want, but it's actually degrading to the very people who you supposedly help. And so that drew me in a way that could speak to a 19-year-old. in a way that still leaves me a Hayek guy, even though I can acknowledge that Mises might be the more based. Okay.
All right, fair enough. It's a fair answer that the guy who brought you into this always has a special place, because to this day I would take a bullet for Ron Paul. And so just because he was the guy who introduced me to this stuff.
He'll be here on Sunday. You'll have your chance.
I mean, you'd have to be more than be here, but also... Okay, anyway.
Could I
don't actually want to.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah. Sure, go ahead.
Because I like a lot of what you have to say. I genuinely do. And I think that the 75% across-the-board federal headcount cuts is like... That is a massive step in the direction of saving this country, and I genuinely mean that. What I don't understand is Donald Trump and your support of Donald Trump in this regard. This is my genuine belief that the FBI actively worked to undermine a sitting president. I think they're also arguably, if not factually, responsible for the assassination of civil rights leaders and former presidents and other political leaders. Why, in God's name, is Donald Trump talking about building a new building for the FBI in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, so look. So I'm Vivek Ramaswamy.
No, I'm also, listen, the guy loves buildings. I mean,
but what I will say is, I'll say a few things about this. Are all of you? So he's speaking here tomorrow night, right? You guys invited him. He's coming here tomorrow. Are you going to agree with him on 100% of what he says? Nope. Do I agree with 100% of his policy positions? No. Okay. But do I believe that he is the best? I mean, who's going to be the president? Is he going to be the Democratic nominee or the Republican nominee? I think Donald Trump is unambiguously. I mean, come on. Look, I invite you to dream on Aerosmith. We got to play the Aerosmith, right? I mean, I'm being honest here.
I mean, guys, listen,
let's be really honest.
I understand booing about stuff like you disagree with, but he's kind of right about that one. I mean, his prediction is it's going to be a Democrat or a Republican. I mean, it's a safe bet.
But let me actually lift the curtain a little bit, because you guys should be interested in hearing this, and this is not me blowing smoke. This is fact. I've had extensive conversations with Donald Trump about libertarian objectives. All right, I'll just one that's going to be flat out, at least publicly evident. Right? We spoke backstage in New Hampshire after I dropped out of the race about opposition to a central bank digital currency. He did something that I've talked to other politicians about this. The CDBC or whatever you'll hear from certain other candidates.
CBDC.
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying the way that exactly. But I'm giving you what you'll get from other.
Sorry. I am autistic. I'm a libertarian.
What you get from other. What you get from a lot of politicians. Yeah, the CDBC. Yeah, that bad thing that my consultant told me is a bad thing. Donald Trump doesn't do that. He asked me, "What the hell is that?" Yeah. And we had an honest conversation. Say, okay, this is what it is. He said, all right, well, what's the reason they want it then? Right? He's curious. And I believe that if you can't state the best argument for the other side, you don't know what you actually believe. That night, he didn't change his mind. 3 nights later, he's on the stump in New Hampshire. I'm still backstage, and I'm listening. Wait a minute. He says, it goes on stage and says, I'm here tonight to announce that I am opposed to the creation of a central bank digital currency. And he has stuck to that position ever since. And so I think here's what I will say. I think the Republican Party and its leadership and the next president of the United States will be a better version of itself because of the existence of the people in this room. Now, I want that influence to be as great as it possibly can be. And then there's a tactical question. Is that going to be by getting X percent, 3%, whatever it is in a ballot? Or is it going to be some other means of actually making sure that we don't just talk about, but shut down agencies? Actually get in there and flatten out as much of the federal government we can so we can have as low and flat of a tax code as possible so anybody can achieve what they want in this country. Actually end endless foreign aid to conflicts that are marching us closer to World War III. How do we turn that into reality? And I believe it is unambiguous. And I know many of you are going to disagree, and that's fine. But I believe in this election cycle, unambiguously, the best chance to do that is making sure of 2 things. One is, not only is Donald Trump the next president of the United States, but those of you in this room have an opportunity to shape the way we actually run this country. I spoke to him in the last couple of days, and he says, we want to work together with the libertarians. I take him at his word, and if I have anything to do with it, you have my word. I can give you that. that you are going to make sure the policies you care about in this room are translated into action in the next administration. That's what I could tell you.
Well, it's all right.
Well, thank you. That was like a friendly comment. I appreciate that.
Yeah, there was a friendly comment delivered in the most aggressive way I've ever seen. You should be fucking vice president, man. And you're like, all right.
I've never been threatened into being VP before.
I was.
That's how it happened with me. But
that is fair. Well, let me ask this question, and I'll ask this to you, Clint, because look, there's definitely a point here that Vivek is bringing up, that whether we like it or not, the reality of the situation is we live in this kind of uniparty, two wings, and it's going to be a Democrat or a Republican who's the next president. Do you think that, given the fact that Donald Trump was president for 4 years, do you think we've seen much to indicate that the people in this room will be shaping his policy in any meaningful way if he's in again?
This probably isn't going to make me any friends in the GOP, but I'm going to tell the truth because that's what I promised you guys on the stage just about an hour ago. I'm very concerned about some of the maneuvers that I've seen and some of the rumors that I've heard, particularly when it comes to the foreign aid package that was passed just last month. You have Lindsey Graham, you have a handful of Boris Johnson, God knows how that fat idiot would know, but he also said that Donald Trump was ultimately the one that was responsible for greenlighting $100 billion additional dollars that are going to proxy wars against nuclear powers. That is not America first. That is not Make America Great Again. That is neoconservatism. That is Nikki Haley. That is the person that you ended their political career. Tell me why Donald Trump is better, because I can't see it. I don't understand what's happening there.
So I had somebody in it.
So fucking good.
So I got what was supposed to be a gotcha question when I was in Washington, D.C. yesterday, which is, how would you have voted on that aid package? Would you have voted no? I would have voted no. That's what I can tell you. I'm here as me. And I think that I applaud you for, I don't think that advances the best interest of the United States. And look, do I think that TikTok is a good platform for our youth? No, I don't. I think it's disgusting. Do I believe the U.S. government should be in the business of banning individual companies right off the bat, willy-nilly shooting from the hip? No. So I would have voted no straight down the line, and I disagree with my Republican colleagues who voted yes. That'd be the answer to that question.
I appreciate that.
Can I absolutely, that's a great answer. Can I ask you just a follow-up on that? Why do you think there was this push to ban TikTok? Do you think it's really because, as they say, it's partially owned by a Chinese subsidiary, or is it because of, let's say, a different foreign nation?
Well, I think you're talking about you're talking about a foreign nation beginning in Silicon Valley. Actually, it's Facebook lobbying is the reason we passed that bill. That's what I believe. I actually believe the reason is
he's not entirely wrong.
They're literally taking the same videos from TikTok and putting it on Reels. Who do you think is actually benefiting from that? Who was lobbying for the first version of this the first time around? So I have no patience for people in Washington, D.C. who now suddenly have discovered a concern for China, didn't give a second care about 60 Chinese transformers in our electric grid, didn't say anything about that. But suddenly they decided TikTok was the issue. And you know what? Here's the way I look at passing laws. Even if you agree with the law or not, at least I can respect it if you're applying the same rules of the road, right? So if there's some kind of behavior you don't want, then have a debate about banning that behavior. But the idea of putting a prior restraint or a ban on one particular company, I think is a dangerous precedent in the United States. Now let's take the example of, have you seen a case of this social media company that a lot of kids are using, influencing what users see to prop up the CCP? Yes, we have, and I'll tell you exactly how. Have we seen an instance of your social media account being shut down if you claim that the COVID-19 virus originated in a lab in China? Well, yes, you've seen that at large scale. Were your own posts censored if you said it? Was your own account censored if you said it? Yes, it was. Was there a state actor, a nebulous puppet master behind the scene, a Wizard of Oz, who was getting those tech companies to do it? Yes, there was. And that government was the United States of America's government. And you know the companies that were doing it were YouTube, TikTok, not YouTube, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. They act Twitter before Elon acquired it. So that's what I think is, this whole thing is a farce. It's a smokescreen they've created. Do I think that that TikTok is good for a good influence on young people? No, but that's a separate question from asking whether you're going to pass a bill banning the existence of one random company. It's unprincipled, it's unconstitutional, and that's why I'm against it. You can both at once believe something is bad for someone while saying it's not the government's job to be in the business of banning it.
I appreciate that.
Couldn't agree with that more. Do you think, Clint, if there were to be, say, like the libertarians, I think a lot of people in this room probably agree. I mean, look, the reaction obviously has been, there's been things that you've been on your feet cheering for what Vivek's saying. There were a few things that you had a mixed reaction to, a few things that drew some boos. What do you think, Clint, is like the biggest obstacle for most of these people in the room, if you could speak on their behalf or for yourself, that is what you just can't get over the hump to say, okay, I can swallow this pill that we may agree on some issues with Donald Trump. Certainly all the right people hate him, but I can't find myself pulling the lever for him.
Yeah. It's interesting because I was thinking about that right before we came out here, and it was actually a tagline in your speech about turning words into action. The issue has been that the GOP, throughout my entire life, has not turned words into action. They haven't. They've promised to defend the Constitution. When? I'm going to die before they do it. I mean, this is my deep-seated concern. They also talk about limited government. They talk about ending the wars. They talk about bringing our troops home. When? It's not happening. So the reason the Libertarian Party is as viable as it is, the reason that Donald Trump and yourself and even RFK are here this weekend is because the election margins are so thin that you guys need us. And I appreciate that you're willing to come and talk to us because there's not real animus, particularly between you and I. I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. But there is a tremendous amount of animosity between myself and the GOP, who has ran around talking as if they're Ron Paul and then governing as if they're John McCain. That's a first. Thank you.
And if you watch the GOP debates, you would know we agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, look, to be fair, it is almost kind of like, look, I think it's not so much that Clint's arguing with you. Because, look, this is the stuff Vivek was talking about in those debates. But he's arguing with your support for Donald Trump, I think, more than
and even more than Donald Trump, just the GOP broadly. It's like when do we actually expect to see the outcome? Because we're $35 trillion in debt, over $1 trillion in interest alone. I mean, that's going to be the largest expenditure for the United States government. The largest government in the history of the world is going to spend more on interest than on our national defense. I'm sorry, but that's just not a sustainable trajectory. And I know you know that. Yeah. I know you do.
And by the way, $7 trillion of that $35 trillion number comes from 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that we should not have entered in the first place.
Thank you.
That the Republican Party was responsible for leading us into. Yes. Now, I will say this about Donald Trump. He was the single person who, back in 2016, opposing the Iraq war was toxic in the Republican Party. So you're asking for pieces of evidence. It's easy, and I love the stuff you're saying. You're saying it really well, and they love you for it. But it is easy to come into a room, and I've been in these rooms too.
It's a hot room.
You go to a room of people who agree with you. That's great. But to go to an entire political party and to take the signature step that they took and to say this was all wrong, and then to convert the majority of people in that room in a direction that starts a revolution, that's actually what it takes. What takes real courage. See, I would sooner go to a room like this with the Democratic Party or with you all than just preach to a room of people who already agree with me, because then we're not actually getting something out of this. But I think that in many ways that is what Donald Trump did to the Republican Party in 2016. That's the only person who opposed the war in Iraq, other than Rand Paul, Ron Paul, got to respect.
Yeah, of course.
Rand Paul, but in terms of people who got double-digit actually in the late stages of that primary, and the guy who won it, look, to me, how do we take that to the next level? Right? What does America First 2.0 look like? And this is not for argument. This is for opportunity. And one thing I will tell you is, I'm not some GOP politician. I've been a businessman. I chose to run for president over the last year. If you guys watch the GOP primary debates, you'll know that I was not a favored child of that party's establishment, okay? But I'm here because I care about the country. The future direction of not only the Republican Party, but even the America First movement is actually yet to be defined. Right? The America First movement is one wing of the Republican Party, now the majority, that stands in opposition to the neocon view of yesterday. The neocon, what is that? Surveillance state, expand it, foreign wars, keep the war machine running, and the money printing machine running. That's now receding, but you have the America First movement that still needs to now play that forward, right? You got the Dick Cheney wing, but play that forward. The future of America First is still being defined as we speak. And I want you all to understand, this is a major opportunity. I see myself, I believe it is my responsibility to play a role in shaping this for the better rather than the worse. I don't believe in recreating a mirror image of the left-wing nanny state in the form of a right-wing nanny state and calling it industrial policy because it sounds better. I believe the future is combining that strand of the America First movement that speaks to me. National pride, pride in this country, pride in who we are, restoring purpose for people who lack it, and say that we pledge allegiance to the United States of America because of what it represents. Not because it's a geographic space, but because there are certain ideals enshrined in our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, to combine that with the policy vision that we, 98% of us, agree on in this room right here. That's the opportunity sitting in front of us. And I think that if we go the direction of just, hey, saying that this is a separate silo and we view that as oppositional, you will not have the influence of shaping it. I think it will be an opportunity to shape the future direction of this country by fusing those libertarian and positive national pride-oriented nationalist instincts that actually make our country the best version of itself. And I am here to make sure we don't squander that window, because it's not going to present itself again. It's going to be baked 8 years from now. This is our chance to actually get that right, and that's what our founding fathers stood for. Yeah. That's what I stand for today.
All right, so I think the kind of disconnect here, and look, I know I'm moderating this, but obviously everybody knows my bias.
You have opinions, David?
Occasionally. I think the disconnect here is that I highly doubt that anyone in this room would kind of agree with your point that Donald Trump opposing the war in Iraq on that stage in South Carolina and telling Jeb Bush his brother lied us into Iraq was an amazing moment. That his rhetoric about America first is substantially preferable to neocon rhetoric about spreading democracy. But the issue is you kind of have these 4 years where he clearly got rolled by his deep state at almost every single turn. And then, as Clint mentioned, just the other day, he's bragging about how the aid to Ukraine is a loan, not a gift, and how he influenced that. By the way, it's a loan with 0% interest and no enforcement mechanism of them paying it back. So it's very different from a gift. And so it just seems to me like he's giving us these indications that while he might say the right thing, has he learned anything? And also just some of the people being floated around. You know, I've heard rumors of Marco Rubio being considered for VP. I mean, the guy, we're not big fans of Rubio here. The guy, now I've heard rumors about great people, including yourself as well, but like the question is like, has he learned is there any indication that he's actually learned how to maneuver once in power?
So let me say, I'll give you my word on this, and then I think we got smart minds here next to me up here. Let's talk about vision and actually where we want to go rather than, person. I mean, because how much further are we going to go, right? You can talk about personalities and individual people. That's less valuable than actual vision of where we're headed. But you asked a question, I'm going to answer it. So here's my view. I ran for president for the first time this time around, and I learned a lot of things that I did not know before I entered this game, okay? There are a million things I would do differently in my own campaign. Not ideological policy things, a few things maybe, but the operations of it, just running in the sport of politics, a million things you learn, such that if I were advising somebody to do it again, or if I was, God forbid, ever doing it again, you were going to understand what you didn't know the first time around. I know for a fact Donald Trump would say the same thing about the fact of coming in from the outside, not knowing the first thing about politics, coming in from the world of business, but I think that's an advantage. And then saying, you know what, am I going to run for a second term if I already did everything perfectly the first time? There'd be no reason to run for a second term. And so it's my view that we have an opportunity to shape for the better the future direction of the America First movement. Do we want to seize it or not? I believe we do. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing every bit of what I am doing. That's why we have now an official opposition in the Republican Party platform from the top down to the opposition of a central bank digital currency to backdoor censorship from tech companies in ways that we did not several years ago. And I think that this is the direction of the future. Take that positive national pride strand of the America First movement, combine it with the libertarian core of the Constitution, the libertarian bones on which the Constitution was written, with 3 branches of government, not 4, and a Bill of Rights that has, say what you will about it, the best and greatest guarantor of actually protecting individual rights of any other nation in human history. Combine those 2 things. That's our future ahead, and that's why I'm here. And you know what? Is anybody perfect? We're going to say this. Am I perfect? Is anybody in this room perfect? Is anybody God? Raise your hand if you're God. I'm not. Okay, just Dave Smith. A couple of them back there, too, so you're going to have to duke it out.
He'll be here on
for the
Sunday.
rest
His
of
name's
you,
Ron Paul.
But for the rest of you, none of us is God. But the beauty of this country is that we're not perfect, but we aspire to perfection. Yeah. And the left makes this mistake. They do the same thing. Well, Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder. Therefore, the nation was started in 1619 and we abandoned the Constitution because it was written by slaveholders. No. We are fallen human beings. But I would rather live in a country that has ideals and has people who fall short of them than to live in a country that doesn't have any ideals at all. And you know what? That's what the United States has founded on, is the pursuit of perfection. So don't turn your back on that. Help us pursue perfection and the vision that we set into motion. That's my ask for you. And I would say let's go back to talking about policies and ideas.
Sure thing. Absolutely. Okay. So in terms of policies, I think that here's one area where we might differ a bit. One of the things you ran on was kind of a crackdown of trade relations with China.
I would say crackdown of our economic dependence for vital attributes of our life from China. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Clint, what do you think about the idea of that?
Well, I'll just ask a follow-up before I jump through this TV screen. How do you decide? How do you approach this from a libertarian free market perspective, but also have the president who's running on, I'm going to dictate what materials, what supplies are vital to this nation, and therefore sanction or tariff or whatever to diminish the supply coming out of China? I don't understand.
Yeah. So, beautiful question. Okay. This is a question of, I'll give you an analogy from the Trojan War. Okay. So, Greece would have never defeated Troy by tearing down the walls of Troy. The walls of Troy were too hard to scale. So they gave a gift that they knew that Troy could not resist, the gift of the Trojan horse, which they then used as the vehicle to burn it down from within. And I think in many ways, China has done this by viewing capitalism, not real capitalism, but a perverted form of it, as the Trojan horse that they've used to actually burn us down from within. I'll explain what I mean. Is it capitalism if one end of that party, so let's say China says that the United States, or let's use the word of BlackRock. I'll give you a real world example. BlackRock manages U.S. government dollars from California's pension fund and New York's pension fund that require them, the government actors require them, as a condition of managing their money, to say that companies like Exxon and Chevron cannot actually maximally burn fossil fuels in the United States. They have to adopt Scope 3 emissions caps. Yet that same company, exact same company, as a condition for entering business in China, had to lobby for lower listing standards for Chinese companies in the United States, and is actually one of the largest shareholders of PetroChina, to whom they don't apply those same Scope 3 emissions caps. I'm sorry, that's not capitalism. That is a crony capitalism in reverse.
That's true.
That is state-directed capitalism. That is mercantilism. So we cannot delude ourselves into just reciting the same slogans, by the way, as that neocon wing of the Republican Party did 40 years ago. We're not going to just recite those mantras, because that game isn't capitalism. It is us pretending like we're indulging in international capitalism when we're actually trading with a mercantilist actor.
Yeah.
So against that backdrop, my view is, can we depend on that same country for our own defense industrial base? That doesn't make any sense. Now, maybe some of you think we don't need a defense industrial base, and that could be a coherent view, and you're allowed to have that view. But for those of you who actually agree that there's some minimal defense industrial base that the U.S. requires, it is completely incoherent for the U.S. to depend on that counterparty for providing the very defense industrial base that's supposedly defending against their threat. It doesn't make any sense. And so that's my position, which I think takes into account the reality of what we're actually facing in this unique circumstance, without throwing the baby out with the bathwater and say we somehow give up on free trade in the first place, and we give up on trade as a way to actually reflect Adam Smith's vision for the people who are actually playing by the same rules of capitalism.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the clarification. It does answer a lot, but I view all trade wars, mercantilism, I view all of it as Band-Aids on bullet wounds. I really do. I see it as ultimately the reason that our industrial base has been outsourced to China is because we closed the gold window.
Well, a lot of regulations here.
Well, I mean, it's really a large product of 1913, the Federal Reserve Act, and then closing the gold window in 71. You look at the industrial base; it's just it evaporates over those following 50 years. I don't think that's a coincidence. Now, we're
still producing a lot of paper money.
Well, no, that's true. I mean, but that's really what we're dealing with right now. Is that while we import a lot of actual goods that are being produced by China, and we ought to be appreciative because we couldn't afford to buy them if they were being made in America. What our main export is paper, green paper. That's what we export. That is not a foundation that's sustainable either. And I think that tariffs or any sort of – these are all just like pinpoint targets on what is ultimately a wound that is fatal. Yeah. And we have to end the Federal Reserve if we're going to resolve that.
So I'll say two things.
Go ahead.
When's Ron Paul coming?
Ron Paul will be here Sunday night.
Sunday night, all right. So I'll say two things in response to this. First is, we're not going to, here's a deep agreement. We're not going to beat China by being at China. Okay, that much I definitely agree with. Look at the central bank digital currency. The main argument for it in the United States is that China's doing it. Why is China doing it? They're doing it because they want to be able to wipe your bank account clean if you say something that the government doesn't agree with. So keeping up with the Joneses or the Jinpings is not an answer for why we do something here in the United States. So there we deeply agree. You know what country banned TikTok before the United States did? China, actually. So we're not going to beat China by being China. The point of monetary policy, you're not going to find daylight between us. I think that our dollars should be pegged to commodities that actually have real value, that purposefully tie the hands of the federal government. Now, that's a hard answer. But China I think that is a necessary but not sufficient answer to the question. Okay. Because I think China has understood that the gain from trade model only works if you have a commercial actor on the other side. But if somebody else is guided by non-commercial goals, engaging in a system that was designed for actual engaging in mutual commerce, they're able to advance political goals through a vector that was exclusively designed for trade. And I think that's the trap we've fallen into. And you know what I want to avoid? I don't want to talk foreign wars on one side of the world. I don't want a foreign war on this side of the world either. But in order to wake up to that reality, we got to say that if you're not playing by the same set of rules, open up our trade relationships with Japan and South Korea and India and other countries where we've restricted it. If you actually want to declare economic independence from China, producing in the United States is good, but you got to be open to every other mechanism to do it too. So I think that's where we might find some common ground.
Okay. Very good. All right, so let's talk a little bit, because the broad topic of this was about the deep state, but we were covering a lot of things. But I will say that here's an area where I do think there's some daylight between the two of you. I hear you talk a lot about the FBI and the CIA, the NSA. Another three-letter organization is, which is just as bad, is the DEA. And I know you've kind of taken like a very aggressive posture toward drug cartels in Mexico, even at one point talking about a drone campaign against them. Why don't you just support calling off the stupid, disastrous war on drugs and just get this stuff out of the black market?
So I'll say a word on this here. You guys are. I mean, I'm in the Libertarian Party convention here as the guy who's defending some level of drug regulation in the United States.
This audience is very high.
Right.
Yes.
I didn't get that sense. Yeah. So here's what I will say is, I favor medical choice. So let's start with common ground, and then I'll go with where we differ. Decriminalize. There's one GOP candidate who favors decriminalizing ayahuasca, ketamine, psilocybin for people who want to use it to treat PTSD, certainly veterans who are suffering from PTSD. That doesn't exist today. And so I understand the arguments for medical choice, and I'm fully in favor of it. I mean, I've dealt with the FDA. My first business was in biotech, and I've dealt with the same FDA. Don't forget, medical choice means two things. One is we've, of course, been taught the hard way in recent years. Just because the FDA has approved something doesn't mean that you should ever be mandated to take it. But just because the FDA has not approved something does not mean that you shouldn't be able to take it. In fact, you deserve to have medical choice, and I stand for the absolute, actual right to try. And so part of what we're seeing here is this is actually administrative blackballing, where we do have a right to try law. Actually, you're thinking about things that Donald Trump passed. The right to try law was actually passed under Donald Trump's tenure. He pushed for it. But the FDA blackballed it. Here's a dirty little secret in the pharmaceutical industry. If you're a company that avails yourself of right to try, so you say that, okay, I'm going to make my therapy available for people who want to try it, even if the FDA hasn't approved it. Even though the law permits you to do that, the FDA will completely penalize you and blackball you on any other application you bring before them. So that's why no company actually does it. So I'm focused on tackling what I think is the next frontier of actually dealing with stupid drug regulation in this country, which is ensuring medical choice for medical purpose. And I think let's cross that bridge first, is where I'm at before we have a further discussion. On the issue of fentanyl, which is where I was the most hawkish, okay? I don't think it is a drug overdose if somebody takes something that they don't know contains a substance and then die from it. I have met parents across this country. This is not a joking matter or anything else. Okay, legalize what exactly, right? So but I'm talking about where I was most hawkish is on fentanyl. Well, if somebody's taking a pill that they might have purchased illegally, but the kid takes it and they die not knowing it contained fentanyl, that's not something they signed up for. That's not a fair bargain.
100%.
And that's happening intentionally as well.
But I think
my focus is on addressing that crisis. And do we agree on this issue? Of course not. But am I going to be probably the Republican who's going to be most likely to bring the other half of medical choice to bear? I believe that is as far as we're going to get as the next step.
It's fair enough. I think the point that people are making as they kind of heckle here is that the whole point is that you're 100% right. That person was poisoned. They didn't OD on drugs. The point is that you will exclusively find this in the black market. You're not going to hospitals there's not an issue of people going to hospitals and getting a pain pill and ODing from fentanyl because it's tested and it's all weighed out.
So this is just an area where we're going to, we agree on 98% of policies. There's going to be got a part of the 2% window where when we look at what part of medical choice do we agree on, if you deserve to take a substance for medical purposes that has not been approved by the FDA, you can't do it today, and I believe you should have the opportunity to do it, from ayahuasca to ketamine to psilocybin. I agree with you.
All right.
Do I think it's going to be net good at this juncture, especially when you're dealing with, and this is where the rubber hits the road for me, is I'm a libertarian for adults. Kids aren't the same as adults.
Agreed.
Okay? And so that's, I think, where I also draw a big line of impact, and that informs a lot of the views and the stances I've adopted.
Okay, well, I 100% do agree with that. Kids, if my kids are listening, you have zero rights. All right. Guys, I've been given the sign that I got to wrap up. I really enjoyed this so much. Thank you, Clint Russell, Vivek Ramaswamy. Thank you guys so much.
Hey, give it up for Vivek. He didn't have to do this.
Hey, I just want to say thank you guys for welcoming me. Thank you guys for keeping an open mind. You've had an impact on me. Give a round of applause to Clint and a great moderator, Dave Smith, as well. Thank you, guys. Appreciate the warm welcome.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold. Where did it come from and where did it go?